Hi, my name's Kevin Hicks. Welcome to the History Squad. Now you imagine a lavish medieval feast. A great hall packed full of noblemen, all there in good faith celebrating Christmas. For only halfway through the banquet, the whole thing erupts. Treachery, bloodshed, murder. Sounds like a plot for the Red Wedding in the Game of Thrones, doesn't it? But apparently, in fact, George R.R. Martin took his inspiration for the Red Wedding from the Massacre at Glencoe in Scotland and also the Black Dinner in Scotland. But Abergavenny Castle Massacre offers an eerily similar true tale of betrayal and murder. Very, very close to what was shown in the Red Wedding. Could the Abergavenny Massacre actually be a forgotten inspiration for the Red Wedding? Let's dive in and see really what happened 1175 in South Wales. I guarantee it rivals anything that could have happened in Westeros. So 1175, the year of the Abergavenny Massacre. It had just been over 100 years since the Norman invasion of England by William the Conqueror. 1066, the Battle of Hastings and all of that. These Norman invaders were absolutely ruthless as they forced their rule on England. During their harrying of the north, over 100,000 Saxons are said to have died at the hands of the Normans. In Wales, it took the Normans much longer to conquer the land, but the Norman invaders were harsh and relentless in their pursuit. And so, in 1175, there was still trouble between the Welsh and the Normans. Now, Abergavenny Castle. Part of it is still standing. Beautiful place, I know, because I used to work there. Used to bring schools and do little archery demonstrations. There's not much left nowadays of the original castle. In fact, on the castle mound, the motte, there is a Victorian stone building, and some of the gatehouse and the walls are still standing further out. The castle was destroyed, in fact, during the English Civil War. Here we go, it's in Wales, but it was the English Civil War. It was destroyed on the orders of Charles I. But it's what happened all those years ago. This castle was built by the Normans. On the motte, they actually built a stone tower. The Great Hall was apparently a wooden construction in 1175. Now these Normans, they came in, they were stealing the land. But once they'd conquered it by force of arms, shall we say, they settled it. And they made sure that their young men, their noblemen, would marry into local noble families. They would also learn the local language. Don't forget, if you go back, the Normans were originally Vikings, weren't they? King Rollo. They assimilated into the French. Now they're going to assimilate into the English or the Saxons and then the Welsh. Now, some of the staff at Abergavenny Castle would most certainly have been locals. Welsh. There would have been Normans there, and the soldiers would have been Norman, maybe some Bretons. So it's easy for people to jump to the conclusion that this is all about the English and the Welsh. But it's not. The Normans were the conquerors. They were taking Wales and England by force of arms. It wasn't the English. They were being crushed in turn by the Normans. And their assimilation, what they did, will take the country, then we'll settle it. We will marry our noblemen into other noble families. In fact, one of the most important players in this tale of ours is Sesith ap Dyfnwal. He was a local lord of the Welsh, but he was in fact half Norman and half Welsh. So if you go back to 1175, the borders between England and South Wales were fraught with danger. Around Abergavenny area, the Welsh were often having their uprisings or rebellions, and they'd taken to killing lesser Norman noblemen and their officials. It's a little bit like the Robin Hood kind of thing, isn't it? But the Welsh upped the ante. They murdered a senior Norman nobleman, Henry Fitzmiles. They killed his son as well. Now, Fitzmiles was actually the Lord of Abergavenny. Apparently he was killed by the forces of Sesith ap Dyfnwal. Now, with Henry Fitzmiles dead and without an heir, the castle and his lands passed to his daughter's husband, He was Lord William de Braose. Abergavenny Castle was now firmly in the hands of a notorious Norman, William de Braose. The earliest account we have of the Abergavenny Massacre comes from Gerald of Wales, the medieval cleric and chronicler who toured South Wales with Archbishop Baldwin. There are some other sources, but they were written later. But if we take all of the information, it helps us build the story, put it all together of that shocking event in Welsh history. It was Christmas 1175 that William de Braose invited Saesith ap Dyffryn, the guy who'd murdered Fitzmiles, the Lord of Abergavenny. He'd also invited Dyffryn's son, Geoffrey, as well as other leading Welsh chieftains from the surrounding area. It was going to be a feast at Christmas. They're going to celebrate Christmas. But what de Braose had actually said to the chieftains to bring them was he wanted reconciliation, a lasting peace. If you like, de Braose wanted to bury the hatchet. As those Welsh chieftains and nobles arrived at Abergavenny Castle for this wonderful Christmas feast, their horses would have been stabled. All there were treated as equals in rank. So as they sat down, there would be music, there would be food. Ale would flow. French as well as Welsh would have been spoken. And these chieftains, as well as the Normans who were there at the tables, would have been dressed in their finery. They're showing off. That was the custom. They would not have been wearing armour, no chainmail. And as was custom of the day, weapons such as swords and axes and shields would have been left at the entrance to the hall. So there were speeches, there was feasting, but partway through, things are brought to a halt. There is a proclamation. De Braose reads it out on behalf of the King, Henry II. He proclaims that it is now forbidden when riding on the highway that you must not be armed. Now these were dangerous times. The last thing you wanted to do when you were riding abroad was not be armed. But this, in my opinion, was nothing more than a ploy by the Normans to disarm and control the Welsh. There was uproar from the Welsh chieftains. Fists were banged on the table. Men were standing and shouting, but the proclamation had been nothing more than a signal for de Braose's men, who were armed and waiting in the shadows, to attack. Can you imagine the shock, the horror, as these men emerged with axes, knives, swords, crossbows, and just set about butchering the Welsh Christmas guests? Soon, the stone floor of this old hall would have been running red with the blood. It was brutal. It was just bloody murder of dozens of unarmed Welsh chieftains and their wives. They were cut down, but the butchery wasn't complete. You see, Saesith ap Dyffryn's wife and young son had not been at the banquet. They were at home several miles away from Abergavenny. But once the killing was done at the castle, Norman cavalry, mounted soldiers, were ordered out to kill the families of the chieftains. And Saesith's 7-year-old son was unfortunately put to the sword. We don't know what happened to his wife. We can only assume that she was murdered at the same time. Now, once this was all done, and then word gets out, William de Braose would never be trusted again. So that incredible episode in Game of Thrones, the Red Wedding, I think it's got more in common with the Abergavenny Massacre than either the Glencoe Massacre or the Black Dinner. If you look at the Glencoe Massacre, it was much later in history, 1692. 120 soldiers from the Earl of Argyll's regiment came down to Glencoe, which was the home of the MacDonalds. They were given food and lodgings, and those soldiers actually stayed there for 2 weeks. So they got to know the people, moved amongst them, and then at 5 o'clock in the morning on the 13th of February, a signal was given. Put all to the sword under the age of 70. 38 men, women and children were killed, put to the sword. Many more are said to have escaped, but died out in the glen from exposure. The Black Dinner also differed from the Red Wedding. It took place 1440 at Edinburgh Castle. 2 brothers were actually murdered. The 16-year-old William Douglas, the 6th Earl of Douglas, and his younger brother. They'd been invited to dine with the 10-year-old King James II of Scotland. And while they were eating, the head of a black bull was brought in and placed in front of the young Earl. This is a symbol of death. They were then dragged out onto Castle Hill. A mock trial was performed and the 2 young lads were beheaded. They were executed, murdered. So when you compare these massacres, the Glencoe massacre, the Black Dinner, and the Abergavenny massacre, I think it's the Abergavenny massacre which is much more aligned to the Red Wedding in that incredible episode in Game of Thrones. When you compare those 2, Abergavenny to the Red Wedding, there was betrayal. There was the use of hospitality, getting your enemy in, right? Weapons left at the door. The setting was the feast. It was exactly the same, wasn't it? And revenge was the motive. De Brosse wanted revenge for the killing of Fitzmiles, just as the phrase sought vengeance on Robb Stark. Well, I hope you enjoyed that video. If you did, like, share and subscribe. And if you'd like to support the channel further, why not have a look at joining our Patreon community? The link, it's in the description. Now, before I finish, a quick shout out to some of our Patreon members. I've got it written down here as normal. Marco Griffin-Leak, Sharon Katsarowski, wow, these great names, and Christine Anna. Hey guys, thanks a million. Without your support, I wouldn't be able to make these films. So, bye for now.